Elizabeth, take it away.
All right. Well, great. Thank you so much. For those of you in the room, we're really sorry that we're not able to be there with you in person, but I'm really excited that I have this camera view of you. It looks like you're all really small though, so if you get a chance, come up and speak to us during the Q&A. All right, so hello everyone. Thank you for joining us for this panel on lithium recovery from geothermal brine. We are going to have a great conversation today about the opportunity to co-produce minerals, specifically lithium, from both pre-existing and new geothermal developments around the world. So first of all, to introduce myself, my name is Elizabeth de Jong. My pronouns are she, her, and I am on the Geothermal Rising Board, a member of Women in Geothermal, or WING, and employed by the state of California's California Energy Commission, or the CEC, where I administer the Geothermal Grant and Loan Program. Recently, I took on a special assignment of being the project manager for the Lithium Valley Commission, which is a group assembled by California's Assembly Bill 1657, comprised of 14 appointed members representing everything from local tribes, environmental justice organizations, geothermal and lithium developers, and local and state government. So this panel session and group of panelists was brought together today to discuss the opportunity of recovering lithium from geothermal brine in various geothermal resources around the world where it's economically feasible and available. Oh, sorry about that. Okay, so some of the benefits of pursuing lithium recovery from geothermal brine include supporting and bringing recognition to geothermal resources, support reaching emissions reductions and renewable energy goals, stimulating the economy, and supplying a critical mineral in which we are seeing increasing dependency. Current lithium supply comes primarily from hard rock and evaporation ponds sourced from Australia, Chile, China, and Argentina in order from most to least production, with prospects for clay mining and of course geothermal brine. Lithium is not a scarce mineral. However, not every resource is economically feasible, environmentally sound, or effective. This is where we're hopeful that the geothermal community can insert themselves. So globally, about 400,000 tons of lithium was produced last year. That number is expected to increase five-fold to about 2.4 million tons of lithium carbonate equivalent by the year 2030. So to give a sense of scale, the resources in California's Lithium Valley are estimating being able to collectively produce about 150,000 tons of lithium carbonate per year. So that's about 1/3 of today's lithium production. The lithium recovered from geothermal brine is largely targeted for use in lithium-ion electric vehicle batteries, which currently is leaning towards being in the form of lithium hydroxide. It's important and something that we will be discussing today to recognize this for the potential to support geothermal development, but also realize the potential to fully develop a battery supply chain. In recent years, we have seen the demand for lithium increasing largely as a result of policies and lifestyle changes that increase reliance on electric vehicles and lithium, as well as renewable energy, affording the geothermal community a chance to take advantage of this opportunity. So forgive me for being a lot more aware of the US policies, particularly pertaining to California, but we have panelists from around the world, so we can certainly ask them questions on anything I missed. But in February of 2021, the President of the United States signed an executive order 14017, directing a whole of government approach to assessing vulnerabilities in and strengthening the resilience of critical supply chains. This includes securing and urgently developing a domestic lithium battery supply chain. This follows some earlier executive orders starting back in 2017, identifying the need for domestic critical mineral supplies and battery supply chain materials. So more specifically in California, Governor Newsom issued an executive order in September 2020 to have 100% of all new vehicles sold in California be zero-emission passenger vehicles by 2035. This effectively phases out the sale of gas-powered vehicles and reduces reliance on fossil fuels in the state, mirroring policies like those in Europe. The state also has task forces or commissions like AB 1657's Lithium Valley Commission and AB 2832's Lithium Ion Vehicle Battery Recycling Task Force. Currently, a big driver of electric vehicle adoption in Europe comes from EU's ambitious greenhouse gas emissions reductions goals, which are supported and advanced by the European Green Deal and commitments under the Paris Agreement. Several European countries have banned sales of gas-powered vehicles, but this is overshadowed by the European Union's proposal, an effective ban on the sale of new vehicles with combustion engines starting in 2035, aiming to speed up the switch to zero-emission electric vehicles as part of a broad package of measures to combat global warming. The European Union is not alone in this effort. Some of the countries which propose bans or that will be implementing 100% sales of zero-emission vehicles include China, Japan, the UK, South Korea, Iceland, Canada, Sri Lanka, Cape Verde, Costa Rica, and 12 United States that adhered to California's zero-emission vehicle program. So these, in addition to many requirements we are seeing adopted around the world, to reach 100% renewable energy, including phasing out the sale of internal combustion vehicles and support of geothermal development, like what we saw in DOE's GeoVision and more recently in the CPUC's IRP, all indicate continued and growing support of lithium recovery from geothermal brine. So the potential to recover minerals from geothermal brine is not new, but also has not yet been developed to full commercial scale for lithium. In fact, we have had some great panel sessions on this opportunity during the past 2 Geothermal Rising Conferences. And in our panel today, we will hear from folks involved in supporting and developing lithium recovery from geothermal brine from geothermal resources around the world. So let's get started by meeting our panelists. Today with us, we have Ian Warren from NREL, Ryan Kelly from the California's Lithium Valley Commission and Imperial County, Dr. Rebecca Paisley representing Cornwall in the UK, and Dr. Catherine Hickson representing oilfield lithium extraction in Canada. Unfortunately, Francis Beeden, representing Germany's Upper Rhine Valley, apologizes but had to miss the session today due to a family emergency. So let's get started with our first panelist, Ian.
Elizabeth, are you going to be driving the slides?
I am. Go ahead and just say next when you want me to go.
Great. Yeah. So thanks for having me today. I just wanted to give a little bit of background. I've been at NREL for the past 2.5 years. Where I'm a senior geoscientist, and prior to that, I was a principal geologist at ORMAT and chief geologist at US Geothermal Inc. The few slides I'm going to discuss right here, kind of setting the stage for our discussion, come from a Geothermal Technologies Office funded project that was techno-economic analysis of lithium extraction from geothermal brines. And as we go through these slides, I can discuss a little bit more about the details of that project. Let's go ahead, Elizabeth, please. So I'll have to apologize somewhat like Elizabeth did, that we're very much US focused, and just by virtue of the resources there, salt and sea focused. And that's because this work did come out of a project funded by the Geothermal Technologies Office. But the focus on the salt and sea is all about the very high concentrations of lithium that occur in geothermal fluids there, up to 400 milligrams per kilogram. It's probably not too much of a stretch to say you could drill a well throughout much of that known geothermal resource area and probably hit 200 milligrams per kilogram or more. And this isn't new. People have been thinking about extracting materials from geothermal fluids there for quite a long time, maybe even prior to the 70s, even though that's what's said here. And again, the salt and sea is a super important opportunity for geothermal and for securing critical mineral supplies for the United States. There could be up to 15 million metric tons of lithium to recover. We could be recovering at rates as high as 600,000 metric tons of lithium carbonate equivalent per year. And just doing a basic throughput from 2019, based on what the salt and sea power plants were just running through their power generating operations. If you had quantitative removal of the lithium, I think around a number of 200 milligrams per kilogram is what I used. that would have been 127,750 metric tons of lithium carbonate equivalent that if it had been quantitatively removed from the fluids going through the power plants. And then just the figure off to the right is from New Payne and Went back in 2017. And this was sort of an investigation of all the opportunities across a range of geothermal fluids that might be mined for lithium. And the important thing to point out is that the salt sea really does stand out. Most of the geothermal resources have much lower concentrations of lithium. Next slide, please. Yeah, and so since this is there were projects that came before, and that's what sort of prompted the techno-economic analysis project that we recently completed. Symbol's pilot operations at Cal Energy and energy source power plants were focused on silica management, the actual lithium extraction, purification, concentration, and then conversion to final products that would go to market, whether that be lithium hydroxide or lithium carbonate. The sorbents they were using to extract the lithium were 95% efficient at getting the lithium out as a lithium chloride solution. And they were yielding up to 90% final products when they processed those concentrated lithium chloride solutions. So that the techno-economic analysis unfortunately did not have complete details of performance and costs. So I'll get to that in a minute. Another project funded by the DOE involved Ventura et al. And they also got some money from the California Energy Commission as well. They were looking at novel ion exchange resins and the processes to make a final lithium carbonate product. And so those money's been directed towards these things for a little bit from the DOE and also from the private sector. Next slide, please. So we didn't go into the complete details of all the different ways we might be able to tackle lithium extraction. Stringfellow and Dobson did a more thorough look at all the sort of space that researchers are operating in, trying to figure out some of the best ways to extract lithium from geothermal fluids. There's a table on the right: precipitation, organic sorbents, inorganic sorbents, organic solvents, membranes, electrochemical separation. There are researchers around the world that are pursuing all these. But it looks like the companies that are moving forward and are out there in the investor space are proposing absorption, ion exchange, or solvent extraction processes to move ahead to get up to scale and demonstrate what can be done out in the marketplace. Next slide, please. So our techno-economic analysis, we were never given the scope to do a robust build from geothermal fluid at the tail end of a power plant all the way through lithium extracted and a depleted fluid re-injected into the reservoir. So what we had to look at was what was publicly available in terms of costs. And these aren't just geothermal brine projects. They're oil field brine projects. There are evaporite brine projects. Even things in the traditional evaporative pond salar environment where people are testing direct lithium extraction from fluids. And as you can see along the technology list in this table, ion exchange, absorption, and solvent extraction were all things being tested by various companies in the public space. They have certain rules about how they report to investors in the public about their projects and how much things cost. And at the end of the day, the OPEX cost, which is sort of how the industry reports these things, looks to be on the order of, ballpark $4,000 per metric ton lithium carbonate equivalent, which looks competitive and something you can actually potentially pull off. What's left out here is probably on the order of $1,000 to $2,000 per metric ton of finance costs, taxes, and related things. But in terms of OPEX, it looks like it's something that could be, competitive in today's marketplace. And it's scaled models, bench tests, and what has been called mini pilot tests that have driven the reporting of these numbers. And so the next big thing we need to see is a grander scale demonstration. Next slide, please. So I won't get into details of this. I'll direct you to the website where you can find the report at the end of this little presentation. But there's quite a bit of fluid preparation for extraction of lithium and other materials, just by nature, all the fluid handling that has to happen for power production. So let's go into the next slide. That's the main point of this, is that there's actually quite a bit there that gets a fluid already a little bit prepped and ready to enter into a lithium extraction process. These are some figures and some notes that are come from one of Energy Source's patented processes. So this is all open source information if you go chase down the patent documents that have been filed. And basically it comes down to, you have to use direct lithium extraction to remove impurities and concentrate lithium. You go through various steps and processes that you can combine together to get it even further concentrated and made more pure. And then you have a very concentrated lithium chloride solution typically, and you have to go through whatever process steps to get to whatever final product for market you want to produce, whether that's lithium hydroxide or lithium carbonate. And in Energy Source's patented process, they've come up with something that cycles the beds continuously. They put this polished brine, so that's the highly concentrated lithium chloride, and they are cycling it through continuously and removing a highly concentrated, highly pure lithium chloride stream, which then would move on to the final process steps to make a product, either lithium hydroxide or lithium carbonate. Next slide. These are very complicated. I know this makes it sound, it's very complicated. It's all those little pieces you saw, you might come up with a best solution that's a lot different or slightly different depending on the nature of the fluid that you're working with. And so even in the Salton Sea, there may be some variations in what is the optimal process to use based on slight differences in chemistry at a power plant, or slight differences in rejection temperatures, or pre-processing or post-processing handling of the injection fluid. So there's a lot of pieces that even at the Salton Sea might make you see some variations in the exact process that produces the lithium product. So Salton Sea brines are the focus because they have so much lithium, lots of lithium concentrated in the fluids. There's a variety of processes that you could use standalone or in combination to find the most optimal way to remove lithium from your geothermal fluid. Even at the Salton Sea, they're going to be potentially unique, best optimal for a particular well field processes. And the publicly available information makes it look plausible that an OPEX of $4,000 per metric ton lithium carbonate equivalent is achievable. And you just have to think about some finance, tax, and other related charges on top of that. But it seems to be competitive in the current marketplace. And we really just need at scale demonstrations and an ability to look at, the performance and cost data in detail. And, that's going to be proprietary for most folks that are taking on that risk. And so that's sort of the next step, is sort of seeing these things, done at scale. I think that's it. I don't think I have another slide. There may be one. Okay, let me just say that below the nrel.gov, there's a PDF that's online. If you don't have time to write that down or go chase after it, just type in NREL and lithium extraction, and one of the Google hits will turn up this report. Thanks.
Thank you so much. All right, so we'll move on to our next panelist, Ryan Kelly.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So I'm Ryan Kelly. I'm a county supervisor from Imperial County. I represent an area that is the known geothermal resource that Ian just mentioned. We are on the southeast corner of California, bordering Mexico and Arizona. And we have a history with geothermal. And I'll share just a few things. In the 1920s, the first wells were drilled in Imperial Valley. In the 40s and 50s, they were exploring oil and did some more drilling. In the 60s, they went after mineral recovery, especially for potash. And in the 70s, geothermal wells were built or established, and power plants were set up and built under a California initiative for renewable energy that Governor Brown in his first tenure supported. And so they expanded during the 80s and 90s. In the early 2000s, Cal Energy went after a zinc recovery test facility. And it was successful up to the point that the commodity market made it no longer viable, and they shuttered that plant. And then, as Ian mentioned, in 2008-9 through 2015-16, Symbol Materials was here, and they had put a pilot project adjacent to one of the geothermal plants, and they did produce a wealth of information about the resource.
I lost sound on Ryan.
So currently, geothermal, we have planning documents, transmission elements for geothermal in Imperial County. We have 9 known geothermal resource areas, but the one of significance for this conversation is about Lithium Valley, the area that is around the Salton Sea in the southeast corner. We have 20 geothermal plants in the county, 560 megawatts of baseload grid power, and we have a proven track record of geothermal development in this county. And what we're looking to see in the near future is the development of mineral recovery facilities at our existing geothermal plants, the development of new geothermal and mineral recovery cogen plants and ancillary business, repurposing some unused wells that have been established across the valley, and improve local and state development entitlement processes. So I'll save some more for comments on panel, but I would like to share with you that one of the private geothermal businesses is Energy Source, and they have received approval for their environmental impact report last month. And they will be submitting their plans for construction in the first quarter of 2022. I'll turn it back to you, Liz.
Great, thank you so much. And we do have some contact information up on the screen for the Lithium Valley Commission. Our next panelist is Dr. Rebecca Paisley.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me today. I'm Rebecca Paisley, exploration geochemist at Cornish Lithium. And I've been with Cornish Lithium now about 2 years, and I head up our direct lithium extraction work package. So if we go to next slide, please. Disclaimer, next slide. So it's present. So Cornish Lithium, for those who are less familiar with the European space, we were founded in 2016 by our CEO, Jeremy Rathall. And as our name suggests, we are exploring for lithium in Cornwall, in the southwest of the UK. We're also interested in potential for other battery metal extraction across the southwest. And so we started our exploration by securing mineral rights agreements across Cornwall. We have over 500 square kilometres of mineral rights agreements approved now, and that equates, and we have even more in the pipeline. I think it equates to about 30% of the county, which aids our exploration efforts rather than being stuck in a small pre-designated square. And so we are a private company at the moment, although we are looking to list hopefully Q1, Q2 next year. And so far we have raised our funds through various shareholders, crowdfunding, and government grants to aid a lot of our research, particularly into our pilot plants. And so if we can go to the next slide, please. And so Cornish Lithium has 4 major exploration streams. Although this is a geothermal panel, so I will focus on the geothermal, but we are interested in hard rock lithium as well as geothermal. We're interested in these mica minerals that are in the granite, which are actually the source of the lithium in the geothermal waters as well. And we have 2 geothermal waters work streams, which we've divided into shallow and deep. And as I mentioned before, we are interested in critical metals. Cornwall has 4,000 years of mining history, and has been known, particularly in the 18th and 19th centuries, for its copper and tin mining. And so when exploring for lithium, it's inevitable that you find other critical metals that could be extracted. Next slide, please. And so I am aware that this is a geothermal conference, but I just wanted to mention our hard rock because it plays quite well into this idea of collating different unconventional resources. So we are looking to release a JORC compliant mineral resource estimate in the coming weeks, actually, for this project. This project is based up in a China clay region in Cornwall. For those of you who don't know, China clay is actually our 5th largest export in the UK at the moment. And it's where all of the old granite material has weathered away. What has been left then is a lot of mica minerals, which host lithium. And so we've been doing test work and produced battery grade lithium hydroxide using Lipidico's hydrometallurgical process. And what's really interesting about this project and linking it to our geothermal is it's in a region that has a huge amount of underutilized industrial infrastructure. So the China clay region and industry in that area has been declining recently. And so there's a lot of port access, road access, rail access that is not being used to its capacity. And so we'd be looking to build a pilot plant for our hard rock exploration in that region, but also looking at how we can combine that with geothermal. Next slide, please. And so geothermal exploration, we have our shallow exploration. So this is waters that are circulating in the subsurface to about 2 kilometers. As part of this project and this work stream, we drilled 2 proof of concept boreholes to about 1,000 meters and isolated different geological structures that we found along this borehole. And I say proof of concept because the lithium in this area was first noted in 1864, so it's 150 years ago. And since then, there have been no direct evidence of finding those waters actually circulating in the subsurface. Fortunately, we found them, and despite hitting, the same structure 150 years later, we were getting the same temperature and the same lithium grades that the miners were hitting when they were mining for tin and copper back in the 1800s. And so we've now developed one of these sites for almost as a direct lithium extraction plug and play test research facility, where we are looking to have a series of different lithium extraction companies come and test their technology on our very unique waters. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we also have a deep geothermal exploration workstream, which is particularly pertinent to this panel. This would be where we're looking at the co-production of geothermal power and lithium. So with shallow geothermal waters, you can certainly look at geothermal heat plus lithium, whereas these deeper waters are high enough temperature that you could look into power production. We're working with a company called Geothermal Engineering Limited, or GEL, through a joint venture called GeoCubed. And all of the acronyms get quite confusing, but they've drilled 2 boreholes to 2.5 and 5.2 kilometers. So that's your injection borehole and your production borehole. And we found that the water circulating in the structures at that depth has over 260 parts per million lithium. And what's particularly interesting about these waters, and you can see the graph on the right-hand side, is actually the dissolved solids, so all the other stuff, is significantly lower than what you find in geothermal brines around the world, really. And so we've then, as a result, we've taken a kind of broad approach in looking at understanding lithium extraction, because these waters certainly behave differently to those that you'd find in the Salton Sea when you're trying to extract the lithium. And as part of this GeoCube project, we're commissioning a pilot plant that will be starting up in March 2022. We are working with a French company called Geolith, who will be the DLE supplier for that. And that will be running off some of these waters that we find circulating at this depth. Next slide, please. And so one of the things we were asked to talk about was needs for the future. And I took that as what do we need for the future? And why is lithium important? As I'm sure all of us are aware, the lithium increase in demand is being driven by electric vehicles. And ultimately, the situation in the UK is the automotive industry needs lithium. So the government had previously set a target of 2035 in the UK to phase out petrol and diesel vehicles, and then decided to bring that forward by 5 years. And so by 2030 in the UK, all new vehicles will have to be electric or, I believe, or hybrid. And we currently produce about 1 million vehicles a year in the UK. And that industry directly or indirectly employs about 800,000 people, given that our population is about 70 million. It's quite a significant percentage of the UK workforce. And so the government has cottoned on to the fact that in 9 years, we need to change that automotive value chain to produce electric vehicles and make those 1 million vehicles, 1 million electric vehicles. And so next slide, please. And just to add on to that as well, we have gone through a fairly significant change with Brexit in the last couple of years. And these rules of origin have come into play where any product produced in the UK, at least 40% of the material itself or the value of that material has to be made in the UK to avoid customs tariffs. And whilst we can talk about the complexities of this, ultimately what it means is, since a battery in a car is 50% of the value of an electric vehicle, we need to make those batteries in the UK in order for those vehicles to not have custom tariffs on, and therefore be competitively priced compared to their European and other global counterparts. And so in order to do that, we need gigafactories. And in order to have a gigafactory, we need battery processing. In order to have battery processing, we need material upgrading and we need raw materials. So the UK government, as I said, has now cottoned on to the fact that we need to develop that lower part of that value chain in the UK in order for those vehicles to continue to be produced in the UK from 2030 onwards and make them electric. And so the UK needs lithium is really what we need, and we need it quite quickly. Next slide, please. So that's actually the end of my presentation, but I'm looking forward to questions.
Great, thank you so much. So Dr. Catherine Hickson.
Hi, everyone. I'm sorry that I'm not able to be there in person for the second year in a row, but hopefully things will change next year. So I come about this, and I'm on this panel for kind of a different reason than the other presenters. And, you know, Elizabeth has already talked about the importance of lithium for the economy of the UK. I'm going to reverse that. I'm going to talk about the importance of lithium for actually making geothermal a competitive commodity, and that commodity being heat and power. So we can flip through the slides. Next slide, please. So this is really, you have heard this from other speakers, and you've just heard it from Elizabeth. You've just heard it in some of the discussions yesterday and in some of the discussions this morning in terms of the direct use, is that in order particularly to make direct use economic, we need something else. And that something else has typically been power. But in fact, in some cases, particularly where we have low temperature fluids, we're not going to make power. We just can't. It's at least not with an awful lot of R&D and an increase in efficiencies in that 70 to 110 degrees C range. So what I like to think about, so I'm coming from the space of, I'm actually director of a lithium company, and I've done quite a lot of work with a colleague by the name of Mark Kuba. And Mark and I have been looking at the link between geothermal and lithium. And, essentially a decade ago, we're putting out papers talking about that link. Like, why is it elevated in geothermal brines? So here we are, basically, 5 to 10 years later, And we know there is lithium in those geothermal brines. And Ryan's presentation has talked about the areas in California where this is very important, and those concentrations are very high. We've heard from Ian, who's been talking about ways to actually extract that economically, and it looks like those numbers are coming, not only the numbers in terms of the cost to extract the lithium, but also the concentrations that are needed are also coming down. So if we can move to the next slide, please. Yes. So really what, unfortunately, is obviously something happened with the slides. Anyway, so I'm coming from this space, this joint lithium geothermal background. I have a project that we're working on in Alberta. And Alberta has a number of challenges for geothermal. We have massive amounts of geothermal water, but what we don't have is massive amount of investment who actually want to see that geothermal be commercially viable. And that's because our competition in terms of heat. So we're talking about direct use heat, heat usage in Alberta and many parts that are part of a sedimentary basin is you've got cheap natural gas. And if that's your competition, it makes heat from geothermal less valuable. And also in many of these sedimentary basins, the ability to produce power is very limited. You need to be very deep. Essentially you need to be very deep to get the temperatures that we require. Next. So coming from the background of that lithium hat that I wear, what we looked at early on was the lithium in the oil field brines, and how can that in fact help us essentially to be part of the commercialization of geothermal. The concept here is basically a plug and play, that the geothermal fluids which are being brought up, we're having to pay for those wells, we're having to pay for that pump, we're bringing all of those fluids to the surface. Let's try to extract everything that we possibly can out of those fluids. One of them, if it's possible and it's geologically reasonable in wherever you are, is of course lithium. Next. So this is kind of what the development scheme looks like. We're drilling a well and we're going to test those brines, and we're going to test those brines for everything, all minerals that they might contain. Hydrocarbons, our project specifically is in a hydrocarbon basin. So why wouldn't we be interested in recovering those hydrocarbons if they exist within our reservoir? So we're going to test those brines, and depending on what the testing turns out to be, next, we're going to essentially follow one or more of these development paths. And each of those development paths will provide an additional ability to commercialize this project. Next. So obviously, if geological conditions are perfect, this is what it would look like. We would have hydrocarbons, we would be separating those, and we would either be using those hydrocarbons to help increase our inlet temperature for our power production is one possibility, or we potentially just be selling them. We might have some solar exchange, solar collection, particularly depending on where you are in the world. We're going to produce our power, we're going to get direct use. And I put on the slide carbon credits because this is a major factor in helping make projects commercial. Because as we produce that green power and as we produce that green heat, we are going to get green credits. And those green credits we can transfer to either the hydrocarbon separators or the mineral producers. Next. But of course, that's rare. We don't often have all of those. Next slide. So what happens if the only thing And I'm not sure why you don't see anything here, but let's go to the next slide. Yes. So what happens if you don't have minerals? What happens if you don't have hydrocarbons and the formation is tight? Well, what I'm proposing is that, I use for a well which has not been suitable for mineral extraction or geothermal, is you use it for carbon sequestration. Next. So we get this very holistic view, and all of these pieces are going to help us make geothermal, to essentially help roll out geothermal in many more jurisdictions than it currently exists in. Next. And next. Great. So thanks. I look forward to questions.
All right, thank you so much. And as I mentioned, our panelist from Vulcan was not able to join us today. So we'll move right on to moderated discussion with the panelists. And following that moderated discussion, we'll go into the audience Q&A. So I'm actually going to go ahead and stop screen share so you can see us a little bit better on the screen in the room. And all right, we'll just dive right into moderated discussion. So I have a few questions for the panelists here. Please just go ahead and chime in with whatever response you have. So my first question is, what drives advancement towards successful geothermal lithium development for you? And by that, I mean government funding, regulatory changes, fast-moving or increasing economic feasibility, buyers, investors, seeking materials. What is it for you?
Hey, I'll jump in. It's the economics. It's basically using lithium as a way to, in those jurisdictions where the price of power is low and there's stiff competition from natural gas. So if we can use lithium as another commodity chain to help essentially get that geothermal story and those green energy credits moving, then that's, I think, what we should be doing.
Great, thanks. Ryan Kelly.
So Elizabeth, I think Catherine is right. I would also add regulatory though. The climate from geothermal had been left out of the renewable portfolio in California. It was considered an old technology. And we advocated in any door that was closed, we tried to open to make that known. But most recently, some changes that have occurred have made geothermal much more attractive, including the integrated resource plan from the Public Utility Commission in California. That coupled with what we saw in the last 5 years, where all of the existing geothermals that are in Imperial Valley have all pivoted to have mineral extraction as their focus, with geothermal as a supporting development.
All right, any other takers on that?
No, I agree.
We're going to pollute the conversation with some other issues, but to follow on with something Ryan said is there's a little bit of a bottleneck with transmission and getting power out of the Salton Sea area. And so, that's not only an issue for thinking about things from a power generation standpoint, but then also is something that can possibly get in the way of lithium extraction being bolted on. But that said, there's such high concentrations of lithium in fluids at the Salton Sea that there's the possibility of making geothermal power to run your lithium extraction processing, and you don't necessarily have to think about finding an off-taker for the power, but because you're going to use most of it yourself, or design it such that your power plant's exactly right for your lithium extraction process, rather than making it 49.9 megawatts in California to get it permitted as quickly as you can.
Just to add on to that, I mean, those are all, the regulatory side is really important. And what I want to also mention is that depending on what your regulatory regime is, I mean, the commodities are regulated differently and permitted differently. So in order, so in Alberta, you have to have the mineral, so you have to have the metallic and industrial mineral rights. You have to have the hydrocarbon rights, so petroleum and natural gas, as well as the geothermal rights. So it is it is something that a company that wishes to say do either geothermal as a bolt-on or lithium as a bolt-on has to look into, because they actually have to have the rights to those various commodities.
Okay, thanks so much. My next question to the panel is, how is your project or work perceived by the local communities? So what do you do to encourage involvement, mitigate any issues or concerns, et cetera?
I can jump in speaking on behalf of Cornish Lithium. So probably because we're slightly unique in the sense that Cornwall has, this huge mining heritage, but the last mine really closed in 1998. And so it's one of the few places globally that people want mining to come back. People miss mining. And so we have a huge amount of support from the local towns and villages, really, and we also are very proactive in how we interact with local businesses, hiring I think at least a third of our team is from local to Cornwall, and we attend all of the parish council meetings. That would be like the UK equivalent of like a town hall meeting, and really give regular updates to what's going on. And as part of that as well, like I mentioned before, funding, we've done a lot of crowdfunding, crowdcube kind of funding. And so there's a huge number, there's thousands and thousands of people in Cornwall who have just put in 10 quid, 20 quid into Cornish Lithium because they want to see those kind of companies succeed, full well knowing that they're not doing it to get their money back necessarily. So it's very different, I think, but I'd be interested to see how that compares to kind of the Salton Sea region and up in Alberta.
I have a quick follow-up question for you there, though. With the community being supportive of it, what do you see as their main reason to be so supportive? Is there a direct relation to jobs or just economic boost for the community? Is there something like that?
That's a good question. Yeah, before we started the panel, we were talking about Cornwall's mining heritage. So Cornwall was once the richest square mile in the world, and that was down to tin and copper mining. And as I said, mines closed in 1998, and Cornwall's now one of the poorest areas in Europe. And so, and yes, okay, that was 200 years of mining riches quickly leaving, but you'd speak to anyone in Cornwall and it was like my grandpa was down the mine, my uncle was down the mine, I remember when this mine closed. And so they understand the direct impact it can have on a community in terms of just it's a very powerful and large industry to be involved in, but also the indirect boost is huge. One group did a study on just the drill campaign for the deep geothermal hole, and the drillers who came in were only there for like 6 months, spent £3,000 on pasties, so which is Cornish pasties. So all of that's just a small example, but you bring in a huge industry into a region, and all of the positive indirect things kind of come with it, and people understand that here.
Great, thank you so much. So Ryan, if we could hear from you, Salton Sea perspective.
So, things have moved, as we mentioned before, they've moved very fast, and we've started a conversation that meets every month in Imperial County. It includes industry, it includes the county, includes environmental justice, social justice, community-based organizations. And the conversation is about incentives and some kind of community benefit, the balance between that, workforce development, education, infrastructure. We're also trying to take a look at supporting like regional testing laboratory and supporting the development here. It's been encouraging, and industry has been engaged in all these conversations. One of the offshoots of that was there was a local newspaper that ran an article in comparing what's being proposed at Salton Sea with the solar evaporation ponds in South America. And we realized from that we needed to educate some people in our own backyard. And so we had a media day on Friday, and the local press attended, and we're going to continue to do that. We're also encouraging industry to make people aware of what's being proposed here as well, because that comparison, we're talking about a much cleaner path towards sustainable commodity, and that kind of misinformation can lead to some more conflict.
And maybe I could just jump in here and give you the perspective from 3 different jurisdictions. So the other jurisdictions that Dacian Lithium has projects in is Nevada, as well as in Argentina. And so we have Alberta, oil field oriented, Nevada, and Argentina. And of course, one of the things that is of significant concern to Nevadans is the evaporation ponds. So one of the things that our company, and I know many companies, particularly those dealing with oil field brines, because you also need to remember that the oil field brines are being produced, many of them are sour, so they cannot be vented to atmosphere. So they have to be contained. So the only way you're going to extract the lithium is through direct extraction technology. And so that's the only way you're going to do it in Alberta. That is, in Nevada, you have an existing lithium extraction facility that uses evaporation ponds. So people can see that. And of course, you know, it doesn't look pretty, I guess is the way to put it. And then in Argentina, it's similar. Large evaporation ponds, and in the context of Argentina, up in the Puna, the problem there is water, and is the evaporation actually having an impact on the long-term viability of groundwater? So there is significant concern among the local residents about lithium extraction in general, and its impact both on surface water as well as subsurface water. So what is absolutely vital in those jurisdictions is dialogue, continuing dialogue, close dialogue with all affected parties, and also moving forward on direct extraction. So Ian, the work of NREL, I think is critical. There has been hundreds of millions of dollars invested around the world by big companies and small companies into how do we do this in a commercially viable way. And I'm pleased to see that you've got that $4,000. Remember, lithium was less than $4,000 only a few years ago. It really has been only since 2000, well, the last 10 years where you've seen this escalation in the price of lithium. And also remember that price dropped. So in 2018, in that time frame, the global price of lithium actually took a plunge. So it did a run up and then it plunged back down again. And now we're starting a run up. So the cost, the ability to do a direct extraction in a commercially viable way is extremely important to essentially being able to tap this commodity.
Thank you so much. All right. Any other comments on community impact? Okay. All right. So will this development, and by this I mean, the geothermal development as well as the add-on facility, the lithium processing, will it result in a net growth of geothermal resources? So what I mean by that is there going to be new geothermal development to accommodate the new rush for lithium development, or is there a different way that it will add to the geothermal world, like by having gained attention basically towards the geothermal resources that are available? And keeping in mind our audience here at a geothermal conference, particularly interested if it will create geothermal jobs.
The quick answer from me is yes, that's my thesis.
I'll concur. No, I mean, in all seriousness, there's opportunity to add a value stream beyond just power. And so that can always help project dynamics, and it maybe could be something that unlocks sort of near-term development in salt and sea by those being such highly lithium enriched fluids that you can go a lithium production play versus thinking about trying to get power out of the basin kind of thing, that you might be able to make the perfect project that's about lithium and the extractions driven by the geothermal power that comes with those fluids. So yeah, in the end, one way or another, this should be multiple ways that it might be able to help with future additional geothermal deployments.
Great. Dr. Paisley?
I mean, there's no geothermal power in the UK at the moment. So yes, as the short answer. I think it improves the economics of a project, be it a lithium project looking to make power or a power project looking to make lithium. And particularly in the UK, we wouldn't have those huge power plants that you guys have in the Salton Sea, and so the economics is a very complex situation. So the more power or more heat that you can produce as byproducts for lithium, so I'm coming from the mining industry into geothermal, the more the better, for sure. And I think heat in particular is going to be something that we'll be actively working with a series of partners to have on nearly every lithium project that we hopefully get up and running.
Great, thanks. How about you, Ryan? Anything to add?
No, I'm in agreement with everyone that the impact that we see could be 2- or 3-fold for energy production here. And Ian is right about the availability of transmission from this valley. Jurisdictional issue that will be resolved hopefully soon, but there's definitely, most of all the policy decisions have guided towards that, and I'm sure the other one will follow fairly soon.
Great, thanks. So Dr. Hickson, let's go back to you and ask that question of how did we do a short panel discussion there?
I'm sorry, you broke up halfway through. I didn't, Elizabeth, I didn't hear the question.
Oh, sorry, I think I had bad connection. So I was just asking how you feel about how we condensed your thesis into a really quick question and answer in our panel.
Well, you know what? I think it's great. I think that the important thing is that we have to solve the commercial viability of direct extraction. That's the nut that has to be cracked. And that has to be applicable for oil field brines, because I must say that, for instance, the Cornish brines are actually not as difficult to deal with as some of the oil field brines. So that's the nut that has to be cracked.
Great, thank you. I do see that we're starting to get some questions in the chat. We will turn to Q&A very soon, so please feel free to keep adding in the Q&A or in the chat. We'll get to those, and then folks in the room as well.
Following on from what Catherine said, I just wanted to mention that our techno-economic analysis report looked at not just geothermal, but a range of brine types, including oil field brines, and from public companies that are burdened with rules about how they report about projects and how they report about possible project financing. And so oil field brines, and this happened to be, an Alberta-based project, but they helped inform that kind of ballpark $4,000 per metric ton lithium carbonate equivalent, excluding taxes, finances, and other similar charges. But looks to be certainly competitive in the space right now. But as Catherine pointed out, it wasn't that many months ago when we were at about $7,000 per metric ton LCE, and today we're up around 14,000. That's last week. Maybe I'm off by a little bit, but I think everyone's coming around to the idea that the world's going to need a lot of lithium, and so I don't know. The pontificators probably expect that price to stay more high than low, hopefully.
All right. So another question for the panel. Is the geothermal community working closely with auto manufacturers, battery manufacturers, other raw material supplies to cooperatively build a supply chain? And if not, what kind of connections, financial or other, might be beneficial for this endeavor?
So I guess I'll start off by saying that we are not working directly with supply chain. I mean, our focus for Alberta project is geothermal, and but what we're trying to do is engage companies that might be interested in the lithium extraction side to be the bolt-on once we have some chemistry and we actually know that lithium is viable. But where I've been working very closely with other companies is in our Nevada and our Argentinian projects, directly on direct extraction, is getting that done and getting that done commercially.
Thank you. So how about the others on this? What are you guys doing with the auto manufacturing supply chain?
So Elizabeth, this is Ryan. We are talking to the companies that have pilot projects or planning, and they are engaged in conversations. Some that we're not aware of what entity they are talking to, but we've also had conversations, past, present, with companies and trying to encourage some of them to look at the area, not just for the commodity resource, but also for the development of cathodes and batteries and recycling and other, we're even talking about doing a specific planning area that would include industrial and manufacturing into the area of the South Salton Sea.
Great, thank you. Dr. Paisley?
Yeah, I've had talks with various automotive companies, partly to understand just what they want now and what they're going to want in 2030 and 2040. From a mining perspective, often it's talking about offtake agreements, which I think if Francis was here, he would certainly be talking about their recent signings. And we've seen it's not just lithium, it's that everything that goes into the battery. BMW have announced that various offtake agreements for other metals, cobalt, nickel, so on, in order to ensure that the material, they know where the material is coming from ultimately. And I think what we're trying to understand through our conversations with those OEMs is, it looks like they want almost a blockchain type technology, so they can tell you exactly where all of those components in the battery or all of those components in the car have come from. And we need to know that because we need to prepare for that as a mining company. And I think that's probably the same for any lithium producer and so on. So that's one thing that we've been trying to get our heads around. And also, you know, UK side, as I mentioned before, you know, we don't really have any gigafactories. We don't have upgrading on a significant scale. And so those conversations, not just, you know, the raw materials and then the car, but everyone in between, those conversations are happening in workshops and all sorts galore, trying to figure out, well, what do we do and how do we do it quickly enough that we can scale this up. So I think those conversations are very important and probably need to be happening more.
Great, thank you. Well, go ahead, Dr. Hickson.
So just wanted to add to that is that, you know, one of the things is changing battery technologies and changing chemistries and whatnot. So we've, you know, continued to have lots of discussions with various manufacturers of batteries to really ask them, you know, like, what is it that you're expecting? Where do you think your research is going? What do you think that will have as an impact on the chemistry of the brines and the extraction technologies? So I think, you know, that's you know, a very important part of you know, how we move this forward. And certainly just the changing rules and regulations in the sense of, you know, the edict that we have battery powered cars and whatnot means that any company that's in the lithium space has got to be talking to all of those people, from the political side of the equation to the technical side of the equation, to figure out what their raw material, how they're going to produce it, who they're producing it for, and where it's going to end up in that commodity chain.
Thank you. Ian?
I was just going to say, first of all, I can't speak for operators in the Salton Sea, but I would be surprised if they're not communicating with various components of the supply chain. So I'm sure that kind of thing's happening. But I just want to mention that probably the largest scale demonstrations that have happened at Salton Sea in the past were Symbol. And at one point, Tesla had an offer on the table or nearly on the table to buy Symbol. And this is, you know, their technology has evolved a little bit and it's moved off to some different owners, but it's very similar to the kind of things that people are proposing to do today that CEC is also funding. So there is that, but another side of that coin is that Tesla's also recently filed patents for lithium extraction technology focused on clay minerals. So you know, a company with resources like Tesla can also think about going and doing their own thing, which is maybe some incentive for geothermal developers, especially where they have lithium-rich resources, to get connected, as Catherine pointed out, with the direct lithium extraction technologists that can sit down and do the robust chemical engineering and process engineering to put the right optimal process together for any given geothermal fluid and operation that it's plugged in with.
All right, thanks. Anyone else want to cover on that topic? Okay, just a couple questions left before we'll go over to the Q&A. So one question is, are you looking ahead to recovering other minerals or rare earths from geothermal brine? And if you could give us a sense of timeline, if that's something that you're looking at the same time as lithium recovery, or if it's get lithium done first and then move on to the others?
Well, I'll answer that from the geothermal perspective. I mean, yes, we're going to be analyzing for whatever we might be able to sell profitably to, in fact, make the thermal and the power side of our project work in a jurisdiction like Alberta, which has incredibly cheap natural gas and incredibly cheap power.
We're also looking at essentially everything that we can get out of the water. You know, if you're bringing all of this water to surface, it doesn't make any sense to pump something back down that's got value. Obviously, we are again mining into the geothermal space, but we'd be looking at, you know, power or heat at the beginning, then your lithium. We're also interested in other elements such as cesium, potassium, rubidium, all of which are kind of uniquely high in Cornwall. And so some of those more niche metals we find in our waters here. And then actually we're also just interested in industrial water, you know, clean water. Our waters are not the chemical soups that you find in Salton Sea, which is the phrase I've heard used a few times. And so it's quite easy to just clean them up. And we, you know, a lot of Cornwall is industrialized and a lot of people need water in their processes. And so can we, you know, in certain situations, yes, we may have 2 boreholes where we bring water up and we take the lithium out and we put it back down. But we may have a couple of sites where we just bring water to the surface and then we clean it up and we sell the clean water. And then you'll end up with a small amount of concentrated salt, which you can evaporate, put on the roads if it ever snows, things like that. So we are kind of evaluating all of those opportunities. And that brings us back to this research and development test site that we're developing for one of our boreholes, to just try out all of these different technologies on chemistries, water chemistry in Cornwall.
Great, thanks. Any other panelists want to touch that one?
I would add that lithium will be the first that they will try to establish, and we're gonna see that happening soon. But manganese, zinc, and some others are already on their list for recovery.
Great, thank you. All right, so I'll with my last question here before we turn to public comment is I'll try to ask you to kind of think outside the box here. Is do all of you panelists share a common goal? And with that in mind, how can you help each other? Something that I've heard in a lot of the panels and even opening plenary sessions of this conference have been to not look at taking a slice of the pie, but instead growing the pie, I think is the phrase that they've been saying. Another way to look at it is that a rising tide floats all boats. So I just wanted to throw that out and see what your thoughts are on it.
Hey, am I the one that jumps in first? Well, I truly believe in a rising tide floats all boats. And I think that those that have expertise, you know, can certainly be helping other companies. I think just getting the ideas out there and then, you know, this sort of holistic view is an important one for everyone to embrace. Like, let's look at all the options. So, you know, as Rebecca has said, let's not pump down this brine that, you know, we spent a lot of money getting up to the surface. Let's not pump it down without extracting every, you know, penny that is possible out of it. And in order to do that, we do have to work together and collaborate. I mean, everything from drilling technologies to extraction technologies require a group effort. And I think that's actually one of the more interesting things that I have seen in the direct extraction, the companies that are working on it. So many of the companies are taking, like, Ian, that was a great diagram you showed, and sort of all the different ways the companies are working to, in fact, do direct extraction. And I think there's been enough work now over the last, you know, say 5 years, that there now is a lot of looking at, okay, well, they did ion exchange, you know, what were the pros and cons with that? They're doing this, what are the pros and cons of that? So I think that collaboration really is the way to solve some of these problems, specific problems, but also to help the world's problems of reducing our greenhouse gases.
I'll just say that, by 2025, they expect demand for lithium to outstrip supply of lithium. So that's 4 years' time. And it takes on average 10 years between finding a deposit and mining a deposit. And so, that lithium needs to have been found 5-6 years ago. And I think my point is lithium companies are not competing for that slice of the pie, because the pie is growing far faster than the ingredients are becoming available, if you pardon the pun. And so I think that communication to bring those more unconventional deposits online by, as Kathy mentioned, discussing drilling techniques and all of that kind of collaborative work is essential, because we need the lithium and there's not going to be enough of it. So I think that kind of having these discussions, and it was interesting meeting Kathy, before this panel, and separately we'd come up with the same figure that we use in our presentations, and people are coming to the same realization of this multi-commodity approach, and so why not discuss it in panel sessions such as this?
That's great, thanks.
So I think there's the collaboration obviously is the key. And I think there's probably still a significant space for government, public money to help move things along. There was the little table I showed. There's a whole host of different methods that researchers are working on that if you threw into techno-economic analysis right now, no developer is going to be considering it. But and solvent extraction, for instance, if all of a sudden the cost of some of that came down, it works so well, you could make an incredibly inexpensive process, accepting sort of getting those solvents put together. So there could very well be a breakthrough in the lab that changes kind of the direction of how certain geothermal fluids are treated. And the flip side of that is that Salton Sea, there's a fair bit of non-trivial amount of money from the public coffers has been invested, and there's been a lot of advancement in understanding the best ways or near best ways to extract lithium from those fluids. And it's just a big price tag to go do that at scale. And it may be still on the government and the government coffers to consider this, because there's going to be some value placed on the criticality of this mineral to U.S. future. And it may not be a big deal, but it's hundreds of millions of dollars to really go prove it at scale and take all that risk off the private sector. That may not be the right way to do it, but that's almost where we're at Salton Sea. It looks like they've got some of the tools figured out to do this. And it's just a question of what exactly is it going to take to jump to scale and demonstrating this. But that by no means we need to shut off the researchers chasing after all their things in the labs, because there's certainly breakthroughs that none of us might expect that could be coming. So it's always worth staying focused on some of the fundamentals. And we could change our paradigm and what we're thinking about and what we're focusing on in terms of the commercial process that we should use.
Go on, Ryan.
Yeah, I just wanted to, so Ian brought up that Tesla, and I guess I can talk about it. I was at that dinner. I left before they talked about money, but it didn't happen. So, yeah, I don't think there's a competitive between regions or nations in regards to seeing it developed. And what Rebecca shared and Catherine's talked about is the overall supply is there's a space there that we're challenged right now in this discussion of where it's going to come from and how quickly it's going to be available. But the part that Ian just talked about is that domestic supply and the critical mineral. The United States, this was in the Lithium Valley Commission on Thursday. I think one of our developers brought it up. How does it help us in regards to those two topics, critical mineral and domestic supply, if we develop this and it's sent to a foreign nation for cathode or battery? that wouldn't meet what the critical mineral goal is. So all in all, I think it's goes back to the field of dreams. If you build it, they will come. And so now we have one. Energy Source Minerals is going to be the first out of the gate here on a production scale, 20,000 metric tons. And they believe that they're going to be operational by first quarter 2024. And Catherine, that might be the one in this location that makes it known that this is a real commodity that can be done successfully.
I was just going to follow on from Ian's discussion. The one thing that we find prohibitive at the moment, especially as a private company and growing investment, is the cost of drilling. And so, you know, collaborating with companies in joint ventures, through joint ventures who need heat, for example, is going to be the way that we de-risk our next, you know, drill campaigns. Because, you know, as a lithium company in Cornwall, the geothermal waters are circulating in fault structures, and so you're trying to drill a borehole to hit a structure that is, you know, only 1 meter or 2 meters wide, and you don't know if it's there, if it's outside of an area of mining. But if you drill a borehole for heat is guaranteed in Cornwall because the heat flow here is so high. The granite extends for over 200 kilometers, and you will hit something that's got hot water in. And so by collaborating with companies that need heat, which conveniently in Cornwall is distilleries, breweries, creameries, any kind of food item that you need, we would hope to de-risk that initial step, and then we can sample the waters for lithium, and if they have lithium, that's great, let's continue that joint venture, and if they don't have lithium, well, you've got your heat, and we can move on. And so that's one way that we're looking to de-risk a huge initial step, which some investors find too risky, you know, as a junior mining exploration company. So
great. Well, thank you. I have asked a lot of questions, so I think that this is a good time to ask our audience. So to the audience in the room, I want to point out that the president of Geothermal Rising, John Trujillo, is in the room and happy to help with directing you to a microphone so that we can hear your questions. And that would just be fantastic. I do see someone.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, I mean, the Sundar Ramachandran Baker Hughes, you know, it most probably is a big problem for you to, do you need to, before you start on any of the ventures, do you have to have some sort of long-term contracts in mind? Or do you just go in with investment capital without seeing a buyer in hand? How did you proceed? I think Kathy has some experience with an actual producing facility. How did that go?
Yes. I mean, obviously, if you are a publicly traded company, having just as having a power purchase agreement, having a lithium offtake agreement is hugely beneficial for moving your company forward. But it depends on the perspective. So for our geothermal company, we are not looking at offtake. We don't have enough information at this point to sign anything. For our projects in Nevada and in Argentina, certainly we would like to be able to sign an offtake. Rebecca, you should probably, I think you'd be the next best one to answer that from your perspective.
I mean, we're a mining exploration company, and we're quite junior one at that. So we have technologies in mind to process for both hard rock and geothermal. but we are, as you know, similar to you, kind of not that far down the line yet, or not far enough down the line to commit to signing some kind of offtake at the moment. But that would obviously be in the pipeline in the next 2 years or so. That's also probably above my pay grade to answer.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. I mean, the biggest problem to signing offtake agreements is penalties. So if you are not far enough along in terms of understanding the cost of your process and the quantities, you can get yourself into very serious trouble. And that's true for all commodities, whether it be thermal power or a mineral product.
Yeah, no, completely agree. And I think particularly in the UK and Europe, and you know, I think a pilot project that's running continuously hasn't happened yet. And I think if we can get that up and running first, that's obviously, you know, priority one, to prove to those, well, A, to ourselves, of understanding the economics of that whole situation better, but also actually to bring in those discussions with people who would want to then offtake the lithium from us.
But the final note is, if you're trying to raise money, having some concept around what it could look like is actually really important.
All right, I think we have another person in the room.
This is Bill Hines from GTEC. I have a follow-up question about the uncertainty. So you don't know at the beginning what the plant would turn out if you don't have a pilot plant. But even once you've established that, is there any risk for the stability of lithium content over time? After you've dewatered the fault system, or you've re-injected the fluid, or you've modified the system in some way, is there a risk that the concentrations you see 10 years from now will be different than what you have now?
That's a really good question that we've tried to get our handle around. So and again, it depends on the system and where you're at. So in the Western Canada Sedimentary Basin, where we're dealing with very, very large reservoirs that covering tens of kilometers, that's probably not so much a problem. However, if you look at the volumes of oil field injection, so this is wastewater injection, you do see both cooling and dilution. So it certainly is something that needs to be monitored closely. And I think you can use existing production data in an oil field setting to give you a pretty good handle on what that might look like. An interesting thing is the Albemarle deposit. Well, not the Albemarle deposit, but the Clayton Valley deposit in Nevada. And that has been incredibly stable over the more than 40 years of production. So the early models of that basically said that the brine should have been depleted and they should not be mining now, 40 years or plus later, but it has been very stable. And we believe that's because there is actually dissolution of the lithium from the glass. So that particular valley has, or much of the lithium in Nevada is held, you've heard about the clay deposits, but also it is held within glass that is part of the volcanic ash deposits. And that is very reactive, so that these deeply buried ashes in the salar are being subjected to the essentially what are brines, and are reacting and in essentially real geological time, releasing lithium and allowing the concentrations to be undepleted over significant periods of time.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think it's actually a really hard one for a lot of companies to answer in this space. And we have actually had discussions with JORC in particular about how do you describe a resource that's in a fractured basement that's not a reservoir. for lithium. And so we're trying to look at how we can do various pump tests to turn what is historic anecdotal data that they were pumping these mines for 35 years at 10 plus liters a second and getting the same temperature and the same lithium for 35 years. How do you turn that data into a 21st century resource? And I think a lot of that will be pump tests at different rates to understand what happens if I increase the flow rate or decrease the flow rate. Am I bringing in waters from other areas? And so that's how we're going to approach it. But it's not an easy problem to solve.
And maybe to add to the other part of the problem is the injection, right? Because with direct extraction, we are now introducing a depleted brine. So the kinds of testings that we do in the geothermal world, in terms of pressure testing between wells, in terms of tracer testing, monitoring the chemistry of the surface, of subsurface fluids, is going to be critical to see, are we getting breakthrough? And of course, in this case, it's breakthrough of lithium reduced brine. It's not thermal breakthrough, though that also will probably be part of it. And it's actually another reason why a co-production facility, because the geothermal side is going to be worried about thermal breakthrough, and the lithium side is going to be worried about dilution. And the kinds of monitoring that you're doing in for your geothermal facility are the same as what you would be doing for your lithium facility.
Thank you. Ian?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, so I'm a geoscientist, so I couldn't help but get the recommendation into the techno-economic analysis paper that the subsurface might need a little more attention. And others are thinking about this as well, including here on the panel. People at other national labs like Pat Dobson and some people on his team. I'm sure most operators, or all operators, have very robust reservoir models. But are they only heat and mass? Or they heat, mass, and mechanics? Or they heat, mass, mechanics, and chemistry? I wouldn't be surprised if they're very high hydraulic conductivity fractures that are a lot of the flow in salt and sea fields. Or if you have a quantitatively depleted of lithium fluid going back in, how does it have enough residence time to gather more lithium along the path? Is that path challenged to get lithium to the fluid because it's mantled with silicification or other hydrothermal mineralization? Is there so much mass of lithium enriched fluid that it's kind of going to trickle in through pores into the fast flowing channels? It seems like there's definitely an opportunity there for researchers. And I'm sure industry is already thinking about it a little bit, but it seems like there's been a lot of focus on the top side, rightfully so, but there's, even in a place like Salt and Sea, where it seems like the obvious place to go do it, and apologies again for being Salt and Sea centric, that there is a little bit more we need to think about in terms of the range of possibilities of what might happen with that depleted fluid in the subsurface, in terms of how much lithium can it gather before it gets back to a production wellhead? How important is a well field designed for lithium extraction? Not how important, but how might it be different from one optimally designed for power? Maybe those end up two different ways of looking at it. They may be very similar, but they can be slightly different. So there's a lot of, and Rebecca got to it a while back, there's so much uncertainty in the subsurface that you have to really put some effort towards managing that risk and that uncertainty as best you can.
Sundar Ramachandran, just a question, because it's a very interesting question. This thing, how well have the lithium and lithium salt precipitation systems been studied? Like calcium, and calcium, activity coefficient of calcium is, really solidly done and solidly known because of, calcium carbonate, calcium sulfate. How well is that known?
I don't want to answer because I'm not a chemical engineer, and I have to be in a room filled with geologists to try to play geochemist really well. So there is good data, and the thermodynamic data are available for lithium species, such that I think we have the basic tools necessary to do the kind of thing I was just talking about, understanding in a simulated environment how these fluids might evolve over time as lithium's extracted.
All right, if I could just ask John Trujillo, is this a good time for me to read a question off the chat? Maybe
Okay.
without-
Yeah, hi here.
Yep.
Yeah, so on the chat, Elizabeth, you'd like me to read a question?
Oh, no, I was just asking if this is a good time or if we still have folks in the room looking to ask questions.
Yes, yeah, we've got one standing at the mic right now.
Oh, great, go ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Greg McGifty. I'm with Solenis. This is a very interesting topic, and excuse my ignorance of asking a question that doesn't sound quite right. But I know there's a lot of lithium that needs to be produced to meet all the demands of the batteries for solar projects, cars, whatever. And I kind of get from reading that there's not enough in the world, that known resources right now, as far as how much lithium is needed. And that may change, but I was just wondering what the economic viability of each of these streams might be given or compared to the existing sources of lithium, and whether they're just taken from various mines or right from the ground in salt flats. You know, what's the viability of these, and how much are your sources going to be relied upon to meet the global demand? I'm very interested in that portion of it as well. Thank you.
So I'll jump in here because we've done a lot of thinking about that, and I'm sure others of you have as well. But there is no shortage of lithium in the world. I think several of us, and I think Elizabeth, you said that at the beginning. If we look at Bolivia, for example, part of the lithium triangle, I mean, the amount of lithium in Bolivia can feed the world for the next decades, hundreds of years potentially, even if we scale up to every single thing that we use has an electric lithium-based both base motor. I mean, the challenge has been commercially viable extraction, and that all has to do with chemistry of the brine. So that one of the things that I see is, in terms of the viability of this, is that geothermal also has a long-term viability. We know that geothermal fields can be produced for decades. There's a number of them around the world that have celebrated their 40th and 50th anniversaries. So that, you know, you're tying extraction to a viable project already in some jurisdictions, right? I mean, I've been arguing that you need the lithium to, in fact, make a geothermal project viable. And that's true in some jurisdictions, but not in all jurisdictions. So I would say a geothermal marriage with lithium extraction provides additional stability to the production.
Go ahead, Dr. Paisley.
Well, I mean, the short answer is if geothermal lithium was already commercially viable, then it would already be up and running, and we wouldn't be taking it from salars. But I completely agree with everything that Kathy has said, and I just was going to say that if you look at the founding dates of DLE companies, so direct lithium extraction companies, they're all 2011 onwards. And that's because prior to about 10 years ago, there was no there was no talk of changing everything to electric vehicles, huge demand in lithium increases. And even, the actual lithium battery was only commercialized in 1991, 30 years ago. There's not a lot of time. And so, I think that commercial viability isn't there yet, because actually, in the grand scheme of things, lithium's really far behind compared to other, or lithium in, that this scale of demand for lithium. And I think give it another 3 or 4 or 5 years, which we're seeing with all these pilot plants, and the operating costs and the capital costs of producing lithium from geothermal projects will come down because people are scaling up the technology and understanding how to use the technology appropriately. So it's not there yet because it didn't need to be. And now everyone's realized that we need more lithium. And so we're looking at unconventional deposits. Kathy?
Yeah, just so to add to that, I mean, the price of lithium was less than $4,000 10 years ago. And the only place that it could be commercially extracted from were salars with high concentrations. So, I mean, that's why that has evolved. And, you know, as Rebecca said, I think we're just now, the industry is coming together to realize there are other options, but those options have to be with direct extraction. You're not going to do this with evaporation ponds. So it's the coming together of that technology. And, you know, really, I think people have only been trying hard in the last 10 years. Like, yeah, 2011, I think is exactly that. There was a lot of lithium companies being born and a lot of lithium direct extraction companies being born. And in Nevada space, so any of those of you from Nevada, like all of the press releases were the same. You know, we have a solar and it is X kilometers from Clayton Valley and, you know, blah, 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 blah. Because everybody is trying to essentially move forward with that model. We now have a new model, and that model is direct extraction of brine and combined with geothermal.
Karen.
So with the techno-economic analysis we did, we were burdened with having to rely on companies that were reporting publicly about performance and estimated costs and plans and what in some details about what the resource is. But it really does look like from an OpEx standpoint, you're probably going to be competitive. And if you get some clever finance people involved and, you know, jurisdictions are treating you nicely, the finance, tax, and related costs are probably bearable. And I just Googled it here a second ago. The spot price is over $20,000 per metric ton for lithium carbonate today. I think my slide said 14,000. I made that slide not many weeks ago. And so, you know, we never want to like plan everything on what a trend of a line is from a commodity market, but it gets back to what we've been saying throughout this entire thing, that everyone's sort of coming to some agreement that we're going to need more lithium production for, you know, mainly to feed lithium ion battery growth. So it looks like for high concentration lithium brines across a range of environments, oil field, geothermal, evaporative. It looks like they've got a handle on DLE technology, and that there's still the hurdle of proving it at scale. And the way to do that takes a lot of money and effort. And I think Ryan mentioned it earlier. Energy Source is going to hopefully be the ones out there doing it soon in the Salton Sea.
Yeah, just to follow on question then, because it sounded like there's enough lithium available to do everything we want to do, yet there's not an economic, or there's a difficult meeting the economics of production versus some of the problems we've had in getting large scales. I mean, I know one of the first things they said about was the United States, hey, you know, strategically, where are we getting domestic supply or whatever? So I guess I'm trying to figure out where that disconnect really might be and what can be done to overcome that problem where the price is very high, but the costs are even higher, I guess, to develop it. Because you figure if the price is that high, there'd be people jumping all over that market trying to pull it in and sell it. So it's very fascinating to me that how it's been difficult to get to that point. So I was just curious to see what going forward is going to make it move faster, kind of like how oil went through its creation in the late 19th century versus now, where you have a large demand for this, and you would think it would be a lot of people would be buying it up and the price would go down eventually. Thank you.
Well,
say the oil's a great, oh, sorry, go ahead, Catherine.
No, I was going to say is it was $21,000 10 years ago, and it did. And so within the lithium industry, there's boom and bust. And, you know, so people that got burned in that first bust now have to come back to the table. And people got burned on both the exploration side as well as on the lithium extraction side. And hundreds of millions were invested by various groups in the, you know, up until about 5 years ago. And they lost big time. But the good thing is that the collaboration and the technological advances that they gained are now, they're going back because now it's back up again, right? And now everybody's talking about the shortages. So I think this is where government has a role to play. You know, Ryan, you've talked about it. Ian, you've talked about it. Is that a lot of the publicly traded and private companies did get burned, you know, a few years ago, and now it's up to government to say, hey, look, we need you to come back to the table. You know, how can we help this process?
I was just going to say that the oil analogy was great, because I think Rebecca has alluded to this before. Catherine said something, I probably did as well. You look at the breakthroughs that came with technology related to development of hydraulic fracturing and completion in unconventional reservoirs. That was very much technology driven. And that, you know, as Rebecca, I think she pointed out that, you know, the DLE players, you know, the super smart chemical engineers and process engineers working on those kind of problems, they, you know, they only start chasing after, you know, extracting this from geothermal and other brines fairly recently. And so, as you know, in a few years or even now, we're getting there with the DLE, and that really might be the technological breakthrough that you know, gets to benefit geothermal specifically when we have geothermal resources that have high concentrations of lithium. But I think it's a good analogy, that sort of technological breakthrough that pushes things forward.
Yeah, just a couple of points to add on. One was, I was just going to put my geochemistry hat on for like 20 seconds and say, actually, prior to, again, about 4 or 5, 6 years ago, people just don't regularly analyze for lithium, because it's not one of the elements that you need to check on your reservoir. So people weren't analyzing lithium. And then, you know, oil fields are a great example, where you'd be regularly looking for, you know, H2S and organics and all sorts. And then, you know, suddenly there's all of this talk about demand for lithium, and then you go and analyze the lithium, and you're like, oh, there's like 150 milligrams here, and that's actually, you know, close to being economic. And so I can't remember the gentleman's name, but whoever asked the question, you know, that's one reason, is people just didn't realize they even had lithium available in some of these more unconventional deposits. And I've forgotten my second point, because it's now 20 past 11 in my time, but I'm sure it'll come back to me at some point.
Well, when it does, feel free to speak up. I think I want to go ahead and turn to a couple questions that we have in the chat here. So the first one, Pat Dobson asked, given the new CPUC call for 1 gigawatt of new generation in California for high capacity energy sources, how will this push to develop new geothermal power resources in California impact the Salton Sea lithium projects? So maybe I'll turn to Ryan, if you want to take a first stab at that.
Sure. So the PUC IRP, the Integrated Resource Plan, we had actually advocated for it to the PUC a couple of years ago, calling for 500 megawatts, just a measurable movement for new geothermal generation. And it didn't happen at that time. But continuing the conversation and seeing this being included when all these other things were already occurring, and we're talking about lithium development, lithium extraction. So we feel that Imperial County is in the right position based off of this commission movement and regulatory policy, that by 2026, the IOUs and the munis are going to have to procure I mentioned it at the beginning just a bit, but prior to the Sunrise Power Link connecting solar from this valley to San Diego, and the renewable energy portfolio for California from 2008, San Diego Gas and Electric, and I hope maybe somebody's in attendance that works for them so they can take it back. They had 2% in their portfolio of geothermal from Imperial Valley. Southern California Edison had almost 2%. PG&E, almost the same. But for instance, San Diego Gas and Electric went to 0. And that made a problem. And one of the developers we've been talking about is Energy Source. They are the newest geothermal in the Salton Sea region. And when they came online, they could not get a PPA with one of the IOUs in California or a muni in California because of the policy-driven mandates of wind and solar in California. And so that's where we come from in talking about how geothermal was left out as a recognized renewable energy. And we're happy to see that change. So we believe that most of that 1,000 megawatts of baseload power under the criteria that the PUC has in the RFP will come out of the Salton Sea region.
Great, thank you. And I think that's just something just encouraging for everyone at the Geothermal Conference to think on, is what kind of policies and things like that will be supportive of these sort of developments and any future advancement of geothermal. All right, so another question that we received in the chat was, what are the biggest risks with direct lithium extraction? What dictates technical success? I'll leave that open to you guys.
Biggest risk is not working in an economically viable way.
I think Ian could answer this one best. If you drill the wrong hole at the wrong site.
Yeah, you drill the wrong hole, the wrong site. That's exactly, you've got a dry hole basically. So yeah, it can be very risky, but like I was saying before, DLE applied to Salton Sea brines at least has been supported both public and private coffers for a while, and they seem to have a pretty good handle on it if we can, believe what's being reported in the public space, and there's rules about what you can say and how you're saying it. And so it looks like they've got, and Energy Source almost confirms this in the sense that they're moving forward with their development. They have some confidence in what they've developed to work with their power plant and their fluid that goes to the power plant. And like I mentioned at the beginning of the few slides I was talking about, I mean, in 2019, 120-some thousand metric tons of lithium went through the power plants of the Salton Sea. So, I mean, there's plenty of lithium there. That's a known. And people have been thinking about the problem long enough that I think they have a handle on it. And, hopefully Energy Source will, like Ryan mentioned, be the first out of the gate and show us what's possible. And I also want to mention the previous question. One part of this, I have another talk tomorrow that's about geothermal representation and power system models. There's been a big recognition by modelers of these electrical grids that geothermal looks to be very valuable as firm renewable capacity. There are not many renewables that can sit there and just replace a fossil fuel fired plant. It just doesn't work that way. And geothermal has those exact kind of qualities that are needed when you're trying to retire that, and also retiring huge nuclear generation at Diablo Canyon for California's case. So just wanted to mention that geothermal energy is something that California wants for the very characteristics that it delivers. And if you can do it from the Salton Sea, you have this bonus of a lithium revenue stream that can hopefully make it easier to get through the development hurdles and development decision-making to move ahead.
Great, thank you so much. So I think that we have 6 minutes left. I think I'd really like to turn the tables here and ask our panelists to ask the audience for, you know, the whatever support they need, maybe you can just summarize out what the audience here can do. Is it just follow along your project? Is it, you know, request something, offer their engineering experience, something like that? And I think that this is a really good opportunity to just see what you have to ask of the audience of the Geothermal Rising Conference. I want to hear from each of you, but I'll let you pick who wants to talk first.
Doesn't Catherine always go first? No.
I don't want to.
I was just going to
You go,
say
Ian.
the diversity of geothermal resources, whether they're exploited for power generation, to deliver heat, to provide materials like lithium. It can be a pretty complex matrix of things to put together, but everybody out there, you know, make sure you're considering it. You know, it's now on the radar of geothermalists to think about lithium, I'm sure, but it just makes our matrix of decision making a little more complicated when we need to be sure we're not discounting a project because it has some materials that might be mined in conjunction with power generation or in conjunction with delivering heat. You know, just everybody keep in mind the diversity of things that can be delivered from geothermal resources.
I would add, and this is not something that came to me, but was shared with me, is that for all the planning and inclusion of what could be done outside of lithium manganese, there's going to be new novel ideas that are going to develop from going down this road. And we can try and imagine it, but everyone in the audience is, there's going to be something that we're not thinking about at the moment, but it's going to be even bigger than what we're talking about today.
Yes, keep your eyes open for black swans.
Rebecca, you want to go next?
Okay. I mean, I'm furthest away from California, unfortunately. Maybe next year I'll be there for the conference. But I mean, I work with companies in every time zone of the US. Sometimes I feel like I live on Eastern time zone, despite being in the UK, because lithium extraction technologies are global. You know, I work with companies in 12 different time zones. So working with US-based companies for lithium extraction, for other metal extraction, for the black swans of geothermal heat extraction, you know, they're all things that we're really interested in as a company. And we do take kind of innovation and research quite seriously at Cornish Lithium, which is kind of unusual for a mining company. And so I'm always really willing to collaborate with anyone on those kind of technologies. And then also, I think investment into geothermal and investment into geothermal plus lithium is key right now. And that does remind me, that's what I was going to mention before, was we need that investment into those kind of riskier projects, because that's what's holding back these projects at the moment, and that's why they're not online. So yeah, and anyone who ends up in Cornwall, give me a shout. Come have a look at what we're up to.
So what I would ask of the audience is, number one, if you are a geothermal operator, make sure that you actually test your brines. And as Rebecca has said, and make sure that you get in touch with somebody who knows how to, in fact, collect a good sample, because lithium is a bit tricky in terms of the analysis. So make sure you get help. And then I would say, just think out of the box. And you talk, you know, like if you are in a jurisdiction where geothermal is a hard sell, I mean, just look at these other commodities as a potential to help you get that geothermal project. I mean, I'm at heart, I'm a geothermal geologist. I am not a lithium geologist, but if I can use lithium to help get my geothermal project off the ground, I'm going to use it. And I think that from the perspective of global use of resources, we need to extract every bit. I mean, it's like the, reduce, reuse, and recycle. Same thing. If you're spending money to bring something up out of the ground, let's get every last thing out of it that we possibly can.
All right, great. Well, that's just about time. So I'd like to thank all of the panelists for participating today. I think that we had an incredibly useful, wonderful discussion. I really hope that we can continue to do this and maybe next year in person and start talking about some more commercial scale development around the world. So this is a really exciting thing to be watching, and I hope that our audience gets to take that away, at least from watching our discussion today as well. Again, sorry that we couldn't be there with you in person, but it sounds like it's fantastic to be in San Diego right now. Lightning, rain, and thunder is something that we're not used to in Southern California. So I hope you're able to enjoy it on your trip there, and have a fabulous rest of the Geothermal Rising Conference. Thank you so much, everybody.
On behalf of everybody here, thank you very much, panelists and Elizabeth.